Pata Seca, the black slave forced to produce over 200 children for his master. In January 1808, the flow of new Africans into the USA and the Caribbean as slaves would stop forever. At the same time, the United States and the Caribbean was undergoing a rapid expansion of cotton, sugarcane, and rice production. The invention of the cotton gin enabled the profitable cultivation of short staple cotton, which could be produced more widely than other types. This led to the economic preeminence of cotton throughout the Deep South. Slaves were treated as a commodity by owners and traders alike, and were regarded as the crucial labor for the production of lucrative cash crops that fed the triangular trade. With the end of the slave trade and the high mortality rates among slaves due to the backbreaking labor they were usually put through, the supply of slaves was running short. The slave masters needed a solution, and they needed it fast. With the route to Africa completely cut off, slaveholders would turn to something more sinister, an idea that could only be born in a mind that saw humans as commodity, with no more rights than a cow or a horse. To add to the supply of slaves, slaveholders looked at the fertility of slave women as part of their productivity, and intermittently forced the women to have large numbers of children. During this time period, the terms breeders, breeding slaves, childbearing women, breeding period, and too old to breed became familiar. The breeding of slaves would solve the shortage crisis and damn the future generations of the enslaved. But within this tragedy is the story of a man who would go on to father as many children that make up a small village. That man was Pata Seca. There are many tales to his legend, with some saying he lived 10 times the lifetimes of any slave. Others say he was gifted, not just to plant seeds, but lucky to never witness the brutality of slavery in its true form, living a fulfilled life due to his prowess. Despite becoming a legend, historical information about Pata Seca remains scarce, and many people are at a loss as to who he really was. In this video, we will turn back the hands to time and visit one of the most bizarre times in history. We will go back to the Caribbean, where enslaved men were tasked with producing the next generation of slaves. Here, we will discover the story of Pata Seca. Before we get right into the video, please smash the like button and subscribe to the channel to keep informed of our eye-opening black narrative. With the advent of slave breeding, slaveholders wanted the best hands on the fields, so as they bred men with women, they engaged in a form of natural selection, choosing only the best men to plant their seeds. The selection process varied among different slave owners, but generally, they would assess certain physical characteristics and abilities. Enslaved men who were considered strong, physically fit, and healthy were often preferred for breeding. This was because slave owners believed that these qualities would be passed on to future generations, resulting in offspring who could endure hard labor and be profitable assets. Physical features such as height, muscular build, and endurance were highly valued. These traits were thought to enhance an individual's ability to work in the fields, perform heavy tasks, and withstand the harsh conditions of plantation life. Enslaved men who displayed these characteristics were often chosen as breeding partners. Additionally, some slave owners prioritized specific physical attributes that they believed would increase the market value of enslaved individuals. For example, men with fairer skin tones or specific facial features were sometimes preferred, as they were seen as more desirable by potential buyers. This preference reflected the deeply entrenched racist beliefs of the time. It was during this time that the legend of Pata Seca would unfold. Pata Seca, whose real name was Roque José Florencio, was an enslaved African who endured a life marked by oppression and dehumanization in Brazil. His tragic existence revolved around his role as a breeder, where he was bought specifically to produce offspring for his owner's benefit. His nickname Pata Seca, which translates to dry paw in English, originated from a tradition among enslaved individuals on the farm where he lived. Slaves were given animals' names, and due to Pata Seca's tall stature, standing at 2.18 meters, thin legs, and large hands and feet, he was given the name Pata Seca. Born in Sorocaba, Sao Paulo, Seca would be enslaved and become the property of a farmer from São Carlos, Sao Paulo. However, Seca didn't actually live the life of a slave. He had a good relationship with his owner, Francisco da Cunha Bueno, who entrusted him with responsibilities such as delivering mail and caring for the farm's animals, which required him to travel daily on horseback between the rural village and the city of São Carlos. He enjoyed a unique position as an enslaved man, as he did not work in the fields or live in the slave quarters. Standing at an impressive height of 7 feet 2 inches or 2.18 meters tall, he was deemed a perfect candidate for the role of a breeder. Due to the prevailing superstitions during the time of slavery in Brazil, it was believed that tall men with slender legs were more likely to father male children, which were much needed to work on the fields and tend to livestock. Exploiting this myth, Pata Seca was designated as a slave breeder by his owner, responsible for impregnating the female slaves on the farm. His descendants estimate that approximately 30% of the current population in the district of Santa Eudoxia, São Carlos, can trace their ancestry back to Pata Seca. Seca's roles were to generate a strong labor force with favorable genetic traits to boost the productivity of his owner without incurring any extra financial expenses. Seca's life was controlled by his owner's desires. He was meticulously checked for diseases, well-fed, and like livestock, he was put to work as a breeder. The exact number of women he slept with or the frequency of these encounters remains unknown. However, it is estimated that Pata Seca fathered over 200 children who inherited their father's enslaved status. Consequently, they too experienced lives of servitude, with some being sold for profit and others compelled to toil on their owners' plantations. The children of Pata Seca were treated very poorly and had to endure harsh conditions and unimaginable cruelty. They were often forced to work from a very young age, performing back-breaking labor on plantations or in households where they were owned. These children were not allowed to have a normal childhood and were stripped of their innocence. It was quite a haunting life, and the complete opposite of Seca's experience, as he was given all he needed as long as he could produce more offspring. The struggles of his offspring are one of the reasons why most of his descendants are unknown. At the time, Pata Seca could barely tell which children were his. Along with those of other breeders, the children would be put to work once they come of age. Just like their parents, the children were seen as property. They were considered commodities to be bought, sold, and traded. Families were often torn apart as children were separated from their mothers and siblings, with no regard for their emotional well-being. Once grown up, the enslaved children were forced to work, performing laborious tasks that were physically demanding and often dangerous. They were assigned to various roles depending on their age and physical abilities. Some worked in the fields alongside adults, toiling under the scorching sun for long hours, picking cotton, planting crops, or tending to livestock. Others were assigned to domestic work, where they served in households as house slaves. They were responsible for chores such as cleaning, cooking, and taking care of the children of the slave owners. These children endured both physical and emotional abuse at the hands of their masters and mistresses. Slave children were also subjected to dehumanizing practices. They were often denied education, as it was believed that an educated slave was a threat to the institution of slavery. Without access to learning, these children were intentionally kept ignorant and denied the opportunity to develop their intellectual abilities. Furthermore, the enslaved children faced various forms of brutality. They could be subjected to harsh physical punishment, such as whipping or beating, for the smallest infractions. The goal was to instill fear, control, and a sense of inferiority within them. This brutal treatment served to perpetuate the notion that they were less than human and reinforce the power dynamics of slavery. Due to his success in producing a significant number of offspring for his owner, Pata Seca received relatively favorable treatment. He was granted special privileges and even received a plot of land from his master when slavery was abolished in Brazil in 1888. After gaining his freedom, Pata Seca found love and companionship in a woman named Palmyra, whom he married. Together, they would raise 9 children, forming the foundation of their own family. In the land gifted to him by his former master, Seca dedicated himself to constructing a new life for his family. Embracing the role of a farmer, Seca owned and operated Sitio Pata Seca, his very own farm. Here, he toiled tirelessly in the production and sale of rapadura, a solid form of unrefined cane sugar. Though his earnings were modest, Seca utilized them to provide for his family, nurturing their well-being and nurturing his dreams of a brighter tomorrow. While he lived as a free man, Seca would never be able to connect with any of the hundreds of children he fathered while enslaved. As a man who lacked formal education and faced the cruel realities of the slave era, Seca did not have access to any documentation that could help him trace any of his offspring. In those days, records of children born into slavery, indicating their fathers and mothers, were rarely kept, further complicating his search. Pata Seca died on June 13, 1958, at the age of 130 years old. He died peacefully in his bed in Santa Eudoxia, São Carlos, São Paulo, Brazil. At the time of his death, he was surrounded by his family and friends who honored him with songs and prayers. Seca lived through many historical events and changes in Brazil. He witnessed the end of slavery in 1888, the proclamation of the Republic in 1889, the rise and fall of several presidents and dictators, 2 world wars, and many social movements. His funeral was attended by thousands of people who paid their respects to him. His body was buried in a cemetery in Santa Eudoxia, where a monument was erected in his honor. Pata Seca's role as a slave breeder unveils the cold, calculated nature of slavery during that time. Slavery was not only about exploiting physical labor. It was also an insidious system that sought to perpetuate itself by breeding and perpetuating generations of enslaved individuals. Just as animals are selectively bred for specific traits, enslaved people were subjected to a dehumanizing process that disregarded their autonomy and treated them as nothing more than a means to an end. The horrors of slavery become all the more chilling when we realize that these individuals were not regarded as human beings with rights, feelings, and agency. Their lives were manipulated and controlled, with their bodies subjected to the whims of their owners. The act of breeding slaves was not a choice made out of compassion or empathy, but rather a brutal mechanism to secure a constant supply of laborers, perpetuating the cycle of oppression and exploitation. Although Pata Seca's role as a slave breeder brings to light the chilling realities of slavery, it is important to recognize that his life took a different turn after he was freed from bondage. Despite the darkness of his past, Pata Seca was able to forge a path towards a more fulfilled life. His legacy lives on as a testament to the strength and resilience of those who endured the darkest chapters of history. As always, don't forget to like the video, subscribe to our channel, and share our videos to let more people know the truth about blacks and to hear their own part of the narratives. Thanks for watching.